As we're lowering our motor down in, we want to be careful to not hit the back of the clutch on the input shaft. With this build, we're pretty fortunate. All of our turbos, our exhaust, our power steering, ABS is all out of the car right now, and some of it's being deleted. So depending on the level of the build or how close to OEM you are, there may be components that are still in your way. Some of those components are gonna be in your way. Take your time, use bungee cords, do what you need to strap things to the chassis or frame rails so it makes it easier to lower your motor down in. Anytime you're looking at the back of the motor and you have your pilot bearing and seal removed, it's a good idea to check the bore of the hole. You wouldn't want any debris, damage, anything like that going on in there. That could compromise your next bearing and seal. When I'm dealing with motors, I like stuff to be clean. So I've already wiped out the hole where the pilot bearing and seal was, and I'm just gonna do a little final wipe off with a little acetone to remove the last little bit of grease, debris, anything that might compromise our existing new seal. And same thing with our flywheel needing to be tightened down to a specific torque spec onto this counterweight. I wouldn't want any dirt, paint, dust on there either. I've got my new factory pilot bearing and the Mazdatrix installation tool. We're gonna keep our bearing and seal separate so we don't beat up our seal while we're installing it, but we're simply gonna tap that with a hammer down into our eccentric shaft. When you're looking at your pressure plate, the fingers of the diaphragm right in here are what are actually generating the force that you feel in your leg or the clamp force that's pushing on the disc. So you can easily look at a pressure plate and tell whether it's a very aggressive setup or something that might be a little more drivable. This looks to be a nice good in-between setup. It'll handle a lot of horsepower, but shouldn't break your leg. For installation, we're just dropping it down in, aligning our blue marks. The blue line is actually indicating the balance of your flywheel from the factory to the clutch setup. Installing our second disc down onto that first floater plate. Now that we've got our second disc on here, we've actually got two different splines we need to line up, so Exedy provides a little alignment tool. We want to make sure we get that down in there and get both discs aligned. Final wipe off on our last floating disc. We're going to drop that on, line up the blue line, make sure everything's still nice and lined up. All right, we're still keeping the motor centered. We're not hitting anything. We're going to start to move the motor inward a little bit. Just watching out for the back of that clutch on the input shaft. And we'll start to lower it down a little more. And we're just gauging distance between our oil pan area and our flywheel, clutch to back of transmission area. Slowly working our way down in. Just to keep everything lined up, I need to bring the transmission up a little more. As we're lowering the motor down in, we just want to make sure not to hit that pressure plate, that ring that's back here, on the input shaft. That could cause it to not properly engage on the throwout bearing. We now have our input shaft lined up, and the flywheel is actually inside the bell housing. Floor jack's out of the way. Now our whole motor and transmission is suspended. All right, I'm going to lower the motor down into those pockets, and then we can adjust our motor mounts to drop into their actual holes. There we go. There we go. With a little bit of a pry, obviously being careful, we can get those motor mounts to just drop down into those pockets. Within your 2